First and foremost, I want to thank Chris Pett for his incredible leadership as president the last 4 years, along with his many years of service to Dignity USA. Chris led us through a powerful Jubilee celebration, as well as guided us through an unprecedented national pandemic. Chris, we are grateful for your extraordinary vision. Thank you also for calling me to leadership in Dignity USA. 2 years ago, Chris and I stood before you to share our vision and thoughts about leadership as we began to move forward from 50. Now Martine and I sit before you, albeit virtually, to share our vision and thoughts on leadership as we begin to journey forward into a post-pandemic world.
And I'm surprised to be here, as some of you may be, as part of your new leadership team. I would not have imagined 2 years ago, as I held my phone broadcasting Meli and Chris's leadership address on Facebook Live, that I would be the one giving the next one. But I'm also honored to lead, humbled by what others have seen and mentored in me over the years. I've always been in awe how Dignity has, for 52 years now, spoken the good news, feeding people hungry for inclusion and affirmation about our true selves. And this work of Dignity, we're not done yet, not by a long shot. We have so much more work to do to a church and a society that needs to hear our message of love and inclusion now more than ever.
It was just 2 years ago that we were last all together in person in Chicago, and yet so many things in our world have shifted. One of the last things that I did before the COVID-19 pandemic set in was to attend a board meeting in San Antonio. At breakfast in the hotel, the board talked about this virus we had all heard about and the shutdown that was beginning in Europe. When we celebrated liturgy and broke bread with the chapter, I had no idea that that would be the last time I would get on a plane or travel for more than a year. We had planned to host a young adult caucus retreat in Indianapolis in the summer of 2020. And I can remember talking with Marianne on the phone in the early days of shelter in place, debating whether we should cancel. Even then, we didn't understand how much this pandemic would change us.
And during this pandemic, through physical separation, we have found new ways of being community online. For me, the pandemic came after 8 years of being in Washington, D.C. as a member of Dignity Washington, where my husband and Chris and my relationship with him flourished, and where we got married. Last year, we already had our plan in motion to move closer to family in Durham, North Carolina, where we are now. The pandemic didn't allow us to say goodbye to so many friends in a proper way, and it delayed our transition into new friendships in North Carolina. But although we are far from a local Dignity chapter, we are still close to many of you all, connected through Dignity USA. We all, as a global community, leveled up to a newfound comfort with the digital world. Each of our communities and each of us personally have discovered new ways to connect through Zoom, FaceTime, live streaming, things that seemed too challenging just 2 years ago. And while it has been a challenge, but a beautiful process to recognize and honor new talents among us and identify newfound needs and opportunities to grow. Of course, at the same time as we've adapted to a new reality, we have a renewed appreciation for being in person, being the risen Christ to each other in love, in service, in walking the road, just like Jesus did to Emmaus with his friends. This pandemic, through all of its loss and hardship and challenges, has also offered us this silver lining to explore how to be community together through physical distancing, to be the risen Christ to each other virtually. In just the last several months, Dignity USA has offered online programs to be in community and share the good news with the world. In response to the Vatican's hurtful refusal to bless same-sex marriages, we held 2 town halls that gave us a chance to share our reactions, our anger, our sadness, our resolve. We've heard from many of you how powerful an experience this was. And who knows if we would have held such an online town hall if it wasn't for the pandemic? To think in creative new ways. This hurtful Vatican statement also inspired us to hold a Catholic Pride blessing in the beginning of Pride Month, to call upon the broader Catholic justice movement to bless the relationships ourselves. That too was a beautiful program, and it's an inspiration to what is possible for us in a post-pandemic reality.
And yet, it was not just COVID-19 that has brought a shift to us. We were shaken again last year by police brutality with the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. Our eyes have been newly reopened. We are now recognizing our responsibility and redoubling our efforts to confront the systemic racism that exists in so many of our structures, from the church to our schools to government and our communities. We have been reminded that we must use our prophetic voice to celebrate and proclaim, as Brian Massengale has said so eloquently, that we are equally redeemed by Christ and radically loved by God. We have always understood our prophetic voice to speak truth to power about the holiness and wholeness of our LGBTQI community. We are now understanding that we must also use our prophetic voice to speak truth to power and interrupt racism as well. Both Martine and I personally, the board, and our national organization is committed to continuing the work of becoming actively anti-racist. For us, this means doing our own individual work, intentionally centering Black voices and the voices of other people of color, continuing to embrace radical hospitality, and actively creating space for people of color to be welcomed and celebrated in our communities. Our commitment to anti-racism has thus far been realized in a caucus specifically for Dignity members of color, as well as an anti-racist resource support group open to all who want to continue the work of becoming anti-racist.
One of the many blessings of our Dignity community is that we are intergenerational. The richness of experience, of wisdom so many of you have passed down, shared, and exuded every day, of mentorship with each other and with new leaders like myself, generously given to each other and to the work of Dignity. Never could I have dreamed of having strong relationships with folks twice my age. And yes, I'm grateful for Dignity creating this necessary space of queer intergenerational friendships. At my first DignityUSA conference in Minneapolis in 2013, you welcomed me, when I knew almost no one. And it was beautiful how I forged lifelong friendships there, and was almost immediately inspired to help lead the Young Adult Caucus in that fall. As a leader of DIAC, we grew our network and our reach of young adults through regular meetings and began a tradition of spiritual and community building retreats. A few years later, rooted in the Dignity Washington community, a fellow DC member invited me to run for the national board. And that was 6 years ago now, seeing something in me I'm not sure I did. And I'm grateful. And how beautiful it is to continue this work intergenerationally with all of you. As the psalmist said, how good it is when the ones who came before us are honored in our present day. For all who laid a firm foundation, built of tears and joy and pain, for all who saw our land's potential, we sing prayers of endless praise. And while Meli and I may be from a younger generation, we carry on your legacy, the resilience, the strength and perseverance of 5 decades of leadership of this organization. You have laid the firm foundation upon which we stand, and we share your vision for the potential in and future of DignityUSA. We are committed, honored, and grateful. And of course, we could not do it without you, the support of each of you, every step of the way.
Our readings today invite us to consider who we are and for what we will be known. In the Gospel, we hear about 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. As they are walking, they are joined by Jesus himself. The disciples do not recognize Jesus. As they continue their journey, the scripture is almost a comedy of errors. The disciples begin to tell Jesus the story of himself. They recount their expectations for the Messiah, his crucifixion, and now the reports that he has risen from the dead. And without identifying himself, Jesus begins to interpret the scriptures for the disciples. It is not until they all stop for the evening and Jesus breaks bread with them that the disciples finally recognize him. Jesus was known to them in the breaking of the bread. As a Dignity community, how will we be known? I would suggest that our first readings provide the answer. We are a community that will be known and recognized by our radical hospitality. Our first quote said, "It is no use to say that we are born 2,000 years too late to give room to Christ. Nor will those who live at the end of the world have been born too late. Christ is always with us, always asking for room in our hearts." This first quote was from Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement and a personal hero of mine. I was first introduced to the Catholic Worker when I was a freshman at Notre Dame. My wife Carly and I met in the backyard of the Catholic Worker in Indianapolis, and we remain active in that community to this day. The story that I want to tell you this morning is about the Peter Claver Catholic Worker in South Bend. For those who may not be familiar with the Catholic Worker, it is a network of homes where guests and volunteers live together in community. The Worker is explicitly not a homeless shelter. A shelter implies two separate groups of people, those who give charity and those who receive charity. The Worker levels that field and proclaims that we all have something to give to each other and that we all need something from each other. When the Peter Claver House was founded by two Notre Dame theology professors in 2003, it was located in a single-family residence. In addition to those who lived in the home, the Worker provided dinners every night. After it had been in operation for about 2 years, the neighbors began to complain about the unstably housed people who were showing up for a hot meal each evening. The Worker was issued a citation from the city, stating that they had violated zoning laws, as there were too many unrelated people in the house. I was a sophomore at the time, and I remember when this issue came before the city council. There was heated testimony from both sides for more than 2 hours. The many who spoke in support of the Worker cited its good work and argued that the house was mere yards from a section-zoned multifamily. But when my professor was called to testify, he simply said, "The Worker isn't a shelter. It's our home, and we are a family. We are a family. We are one family." Radical hospitality, at its core, says that we are a family. It says that we belong to each other. We are responsible for each other. And it's no good for me to get ahead if anyone is left behind. Whenever I tell this story, people always want to know what the city council decided. The Peter Claver home had to move. That's the cross. But the resurrection is that the community has now grown to include 2 large homes and also a drop-in center that provides meals and laundry to the homeless in South Bend, which would not have been possible if they had stayed at the original location. Henry Nouwen says, "Hospitality is that virtue which allows us to break through the narrowness of our fears. It takes risks and speaks truth. Radical hospitality accepts the cross, trusting that the resurrection always follows." Radical hospitality welcomes each person as Christ and centers others. We at DignityUSA are a welcoming and affirming community, and I sometimes joke that we're also the church's best-kept secret. I have lost track of the number of times that someone has said to me, "Dignity? What's that?" We heard again in the readings that hospitality involves unselfing, that is, forgetting about oneself, one's projects, plans, and projected expectations, and joyously surrenders to what is other than oneself. As we move into our future, we must be a community and a movement that doesn't wait for new folks to join us. We must go out and make the invitation. And when we invite others to join us, we have to be open to be changed as well. Remember, radical hospitality says we both have something to gain and something to give. As we embrace radical hospitality together and welcome Christ in our midst, may we, like the disciples, feel our hearts burning within us.
So here we are, still amidst a pandemic, with new skills and ways of being community, but the same mission, still very much needed and yearned for by so many. Our message and mission remain the same. We carry the same strategic priorities forward. We will continue to amplify our prophetic voice and embrace global leadership. We will continue to connect in new ways across our communities, members, allies, and new and broader audiences. We will ensure our future vitality and optimize our available resources. And fourth, we will develop educational resources to nourish all LGBTQI and ally life experiences and identities. But in this new normal, we can't lead like we did before because we aren't who we were before. It will take reimagining, reconceptualizing, and trying new things to get us where we need to go, into a stable and thriving organization that is continuing to grow our impact. When I think about our message of equality and love, that being gay or lesbian, bisexual or transgender, queer or intersex, it's a gift. That we are whole and holy because of our sexualities and identities. And we celebrate that. We celebrate how we expand the conception of God's love. This expansion of God's love is always a message our church and our world needs to hear. That's what keeps me committed to this work. And in this digital age, we believe we must do this work differently through using smart, strategic, and bold digital strategies for engagement. We can capitalize on this massive opportunity to get our message out there, to grow our movement, and ensure our financial stability. In the US alone, there are millions of people who are with us in this mission. Catholics, other people of faith, LGBTQI folks, and our straight allies, millions who support us, who would join us if only they knew about us or were given the opportunity to follow us on social media, to sign a petition, to donate, or join a caucus or local community. We have begun this reorienting of our work over the last few years, shuffling staff priorities and hiring a digital strategist to lead this work. We have grown our base of supporters by thousands. We have dozens of new donors who have never donated before. Every day we are reaching hundreds of new people. But this is just the beginning. I know we have the potential through the deployment of smart digital campaigns and engagement strategies that will help bring our mission to the millions who don't yet know about us and bring them into our work. Meli and I, together, we envision a dignity community that is inclusive and diverse, reflecting the human family, forging new relationships. We envision a future where dignity is multilingual, embracing Black, Latinx, and immigrant communities, and we will build the next generation of children and families with dignity. Dignity's 52-year foundation is fertile ground with great potential, as the psalmist says. We see a future with flourishing chapters and new life, new communities, caucuses, members, sprouting up everywhere. We will continue this work we have begun, offering forums to come together, to form our children, to queer the church's theology, to diversify our experiences, and to reflect the beloved community.
I would like to end by sharing a final thought from Dorothy Day that continues to inspire me. When speaking of the worker, Dorothy said, "There is much that is wild, prophetic, and holy about our work. I believe the same can be said about our work at Dignity USA. Our work is wild. It is bold and audacious. We take risks and embrace change to grow our communities and to increase our impact in the world. Our work is prophetic. We continue to speak truth to power and proclaim our goodness, dignity, and worth as members of God's family. And our work is holy. Our ministry to the LGBTQI and ally community and all those who have been hurt by the institutional church is sacred work. Thank you again for your affirmation and support of Martine and I as we and Dignity USA journey forward together.